Hi, everyone, and welcome to this ninth edition of the Portage Dev Diary. I'm Chris, I'm the founder, and I'm here to take you through the latest features. It's been a few weeks since I've done my last update, and that's because I've been hard at work building quite a few new things, and so I'm really excited to take you through those today. You can see the list on the screen there. Let's talk a little bit about the changes to the Foresight section and how those changes flow through to chat and to the boards. And the last thing I want to show you is the public roadmap where you can follow along how or what I've got planned in the future, and also comment and provide your own input, suggestions or votes for things that are already there that can help steer the direction of the platform in a way that you want to see it. So first, let's talk about Foresight. I wanted to revisit this area because it wasn't quite sitting well with me. And one of the main issues I found, and this is also within some feedback I had with some early testers, was the distinction between what was a fact and also what was a projection wasn't so clear. And what the testers wanted to better understand was what was something that was true, that was out there, that was actually happening today. Versus something that we think might happen. Both were valuable, but they wanted to understand a little bit or have more of a distinction between them. So I went through some changes in the Foresight section, and I'm just going to explain the process of how that information is generated, and then I'll show you what that looks like. So let's just go over here to a little graph, which shows how this is all hanging together. So Foresight itself has been split into two main components. The first thing is what we call trend landscapes, and the second thing is future vectors. So trend landscapes is what's happening now, and future vectors is mixing together some of those things and trying to think about what might happen. So how do these things get generated? Well, I've defined a set of 25 categories. This is slightly aligned to what would normally be called the PESTLE, or political, environmental, social, technological, legal, economic categories. And I sort of took that out of that those domains and made it a little bit more accessible to things that are more relevant to strategy and to leadership. And so those 25 categories, there's 5 main categories and then 5 subcategories. Each of those categories has a number of keywords associated with it. Some categories have up to 10. And I do a number of internet searches using Google APIs to bring back search results. And so this is all public information that is then summarized and extracted. And the key thing with that summarization and extraction is I'm not asking the AI to do anything other than be really accurate in what it's summarizing, and also be really accurate in what it's extracting. And what it does is it generates a number of what's called signals. And in my mind, these are things that are happening out in the world. And so what to give you an idea of what the signals look like, there'll be things like reports from major institutions. So for example, the World Economic Forum occasionally puts out reports that say, these 5 things are happening in this area. So it's a summarization of that. It's extracting the terms and the things that are inside that report and putting them into something that's called a signal. And that's as raw as it gets. And to give you an idea, there's right now probably about 700 of those signals. I do review them to make sure that those internet searches have returned relevant material, and that the summarization and extraction has taken is effective and is what we are expecting it to be. So those signals then are stored in the database, and then we run another process, which is a synthesization process, where we then try to bring those signals together into those 25 categories and try to understand how are they working together. And so where there's overlap, we combine them. Where there's 2 distinct signals, then we're putting them next to each other. And what that does is it generates a trend landscape. Now, the trend landscape is, if you can imagine, it's a bit of like a survey of what's going on in a certain area. So we might think about one of the categories could be things like battery technology. And so the trend landscape is looking at all the different use cases of batteries, also the components that go into the batteries, so the raw materials, where they're manufactured, and all the supply chain issues involved. And that becomes the landscape. And so you have in almost one page, you have a really good overview of what's going on in that area. So those are the trend landscapes. Then what is interesting is that you can take those trend landscapes and you can take those signals and you can mix them together and you can combine them in different ways and say, what if these two things were put together and extrapolated, and we put forward the clock and said, well, if the year is 2030, what would it look like for these things to be put together? And that's what we're calling future vectors. And the idea with using the word vectors, that's the direction that things are going in. So it's a bit of conjecture. It's a little bit made up, but it's grounded in reality. So what has informed the extrapolation are the signals and the landscapes. So those are the two main objects. And they're also made available in the chat and also in the board. And so separating trends into landscapes, which is what's currently happening, and into vectors, which is the directions that things may be going into, I find are a useful way of thinking about things and understanding, what is it that we're trying to get. If we're looking for facts, look at landscapes. If you're looking for insights, then look at vectors. So let's have a look at what that looks like. Okay, so I'm back here at the new dashboard layout, which is a little bit different than what it was even just a few days ago. We've got some quick links up here to take you to create new chats, new boards, and new files. And you can also access those three things through these tiles here. And you can also see we've got vectors and landscapes listed below. But let's go into the Foresight section and actually have a look and see what's in there. We can see that there's the latest reports, and we can also use the top menu to go into each of those sections. So if we go into the landscapes, we can then see the 25 categories. We can then dive into them. So if we look at things like a sustainable business model, and here's what that landscape looks like. Now, each of these is done monthly. I'm going to see how that pace works. If there's a lot of change, then that's great. If there's not a lot of change between each month to month, then there's probably no point in doing it. But we'll just have to see how that evolves over time. But we can see in this example, we're looking at sustainable business models. We can see what the driving factors are, that there's a lot of the driving factors coming from government and from regulations around sustainability. We can see that's involved in the circular economy, resource management, and climate change, and also sustainable energy and infrastructure, and so on and so on. And so this gives us a nice overview of all of the things that are related in this category or in this domain. And then at the bottom of the report, there's a summarization of the key trends that are in play. So we can pop back and go into anything else. World or geopolitical power dynamics. We can see all kinds of information there. Now, all these sources are all publicly available, and it's linking you directly there. So you can go right into this link, for example, and we can have a look and see that it's from this document where all of that information came from. And if we have a look at the future vectors, again, they're aligned to those 25 categories. But the difference here is that it's no longer just a view of what is happening. It is a view of what could happen. And so it's a little bit different. You can see that things are getting a little bit more interesting. We say, well, there's an Arctic power pivot. So this is something that could happen based on some of the information contained in that trend landscape. And if we go and come down here to the predictions and forecasts, these are all made up, right? But these are educated guesses based on that information in that landscape. And they become really good information to go into scenarios because it provides a little bit more specificity to the AI, something for it to latch on to as it's generating the content. And you can see, for example, Arctic tourism becomes a multi-billion-dollar industry. So that's something that's probably not very obvious if you're talking about the power pivot to the Arctic, but it's just an interesting thing that can help make the scenarios much more rich. And so if we pop over to the chat, there's been, this chat's actually been rebuilt from the ground up. The underlying library that I've used to build the chat had a few changes, and I was resisting putting those changes into place, and ended up doing it. It's much faster and much better now. But you can have a look here. It's fairly seamless. I've also removed the option for different chat models and the different personalities. Just some feedback is that it was getting a bit confusing having so many options. So really just trying to be as simple as possible. We still have our prompts here. So if you're looking to get started, there's something that you can put in there. But we can put in, for example, what are some trends for EVs that we could take advantage of? Now, you remember that the chat is always going to bring in my strategic profile. And so the profile that I've got is an aged care provider. So what we were looking for here is the AI to not only bring back the trends of what's happening with EVs, but also to contextualize it and to say, well, here's how an aged care provider could use them. So we'll send that off, give it a moment to load, and you can see that it's brought back the trends, and now it's starting to summarize and then contextualize them for us. And so I want to work on this a bit more, but you can see that I'm showing you that it's brought back a landscape. These are fragments, as I've actually broken up those landscape reports into smaller pieces, and it's pulling that all back so you can go and have a look at the primary research or where all that information's come from. It's then summarizing it, and you can then enter into a chat with the AI and go back and forth with it on how EVs might be useful, in this case, for the organization. So those are also available in boards. So if we hop over to boards, we can have a look at one that I've kind of got almost ready to go here. So that's my strategic profile. I then have a focus question, which was, how can the adoption of electric vehicles transform our service delivery and operational efficiency in the aged care sector? And you can see now I've got two different nodes, a future vector search and a trend landscape search. They kind of work very similarly to one another. Future vector, you can click here to see some of those future vectors. You can then tick off the ones that you find interesting. Same thing with the landscapes. You can click in to see that same information that was in the chat, and then also in the Foresight section brought through here, and we can pull those in, and we can then click on to create a scenario. Now, the other thing I did want to show today was some changes to scenarios. So I've added an additional scenario type or style. So that's the for futures style. So we can, and the way that this one works is it works by generating wildcards for the four futures. Now, the four futures are growth, collapse, continuation, and transformation. And these are really good if you're not too sure kind of what you want. You want to do a bit of an exploration, and you're also maybe looking for disruptions. And so this is why you can pick off different wildcards. You don't have to. You can generate the four futures on their own. And you can also say, well, this is an interesting one, universal basic income and mass migration, how that might change. We then have our four different scenarios based on those archetypes that I mentioned before. So continuation, limits and discipline, decline and collapse, and transformation. And we can then generate the scenario nodes to then start to explore those things. Now, the scenario nodes themselves have had a little bit of an upgrade as well. So behind the scenes, the prompts that run these scenarios, I've reworked those entirely. You can also see that it's picking up things like the trend landscape. So that's come through. And it also allows you to choose, well, what year in the future would you like to generate a scenario for? And the way the prompt works behind the scenes is that the further off into the future, the more wild and divergent that scenario is going to be. So same thing as it was working before, we're able to click to create a scenario, and that's going to generate a narrative story about what that future looks like. It's obviously picking up that that's a continuation, so that's probably not that exciting. But if we look at something like decline and collapse, this is going to be a little bit more drastic. And we can see the story as it's being worked out there. And once that's done, it carries on just like it did before. We can create an impact assessment where we can then look at, okay, well, if that scenario is true, how is that changing our organization? And what are some potential responses from that? So those are some of the major updates, what I've been working on. The last thing I did want to show was the roadmap. Now this is available if you're in Portage. You can click on here and then click on roadmap. Otherwise, you can get it just online. You can click portage.featurebase.app and then you'll be able to see these views. I've got everything planned out to the end of the calendar year. Beyond that, I'm not too sure what might be on the cards, but there's plenty here to be getting on with. So you can see here I've completed at least an iteration of the mobile layout that I'm happy enough with. You can see some of the other things here. So I'm trying to post a little bit more about as I'm progressing these things. So you can follow along. You're able to write comments, and you can also provide upvotes on different things. And if you do have a particular feature request that you want to see, doesn't go there, but anyways, you can go and create a new post over here and put in a request for something that you want to see in the platform. So that's everything I had to show today. We'll be back in a couple of weeks with another update. So I'm aiming to sort of have every month a major release of functionality. So that's what we've got. If we look at the monthly roadmap, you can see it's broken down that way. So in September, trying to really finish off a bit of the polish around some of the key features. And then in October, we'll start working on the more team-based features and expanding some of the security, but also I haven't actually written it down here, but looking at adding the ability to have multiple strategic profiles, which would be good for people like consultants or salespeople who want to run different scenarios for each of their clients and work sort of in that way. And then as the year progresses, we'll continue on with some of the other features that come up. So thank you for tuning in. If you, there's definitely links at the bottom of the video to go to the website. And yeah, like I said, I'll be back in a couple of weeks with another update. Take care, and we'll see you then.